All right, so just another quick stop here in SPSS. This is just to show that, like the other hypothesis tests, you can also do this in SPSS. And again, we're not doing this in this class because we don't have a computer lab. But you know, these are all things that you can do with a few clicks of the mouse on a computer. Or nobody has a mouse anymore, but you know what I mean. So this is another example from the General Social Survey where they surveyed about 2,500 people there. Ask them, you know, do you think of yourself as liberal or conservative, and how old they are. And what you can see is that we have a correlation between these two things that would be considered statistically significant. So the correlation is 0.107. This means that we have a positive and weak correlation. So as people get older, they tend to be more likely to identify as conservative compared to liberal. So as age goes up, so does scores on the scale of how conservative you are. So that's what that weak positive correlation means. And the p-value means that it's extremely unlikely that a correlation this big would come from a population where there was no correlation between age of respondent and conservatism. So you will notice that the correlation here of 0.107 is not that much bigger than the correlation that we had in the last example of 0.099. The difference, though, is the sample size. So we had about 40-ish people answer the question in the class, whereas 2,500 people answered the question here. So the same correlation can give you a different p-value depending on the sample size, which is why I say that the sampling distributions depend on things like sample size. But that's as far as we're going to get into it here. So we have our R value and our P value. That's how you interpret them, and that's what it looks like when you do it on a statistical program. So the last thing I want to leave you with here is in interpreting your measures of association. So whether you're doing a chi-square test or a correlation, you're getting some sort of measure of association between variables. And the one thing I want to remind you that you may have heard before, but maybe not, is that correlation is not the same thing as causation. And association between variables is not the same as causation. So a correlation between variables or a chi-square test can show you that two variables are related. But this doesn't mean that one variable causes the other one. So if there was a relationship between the commute length and the number of states that someone has been to, it doesn't mean that the length of someone's commute causes them to go visit more states, and it doesn't mean that people who visited more states are just so much more worldly that they want to commute more and they, live further away. Chances are that's not the case. So correlation does not equal causation. And there are a lot of different reasons that variables can be correlated with each other that mean that, one doesn't cause the other one. So just please take away from this that correlation is not equal to causation. And the last thing I'll show you in my lecture is my absolute favorite correlation that is not equal to causation. And that's the number of people who drowned by falling into a pool and the number of films that Nicolas Cage appeared in. So what you can see here is that there's a pretty clear association between these variables. As more people drown in pools, Nicolas Cage appears in more films. But it doesn't mean that there is a causal relationship between these things. In other words, Nicolas Cage doesn't cause people to drown in swimming pools, and swimming pool drownings do not cause Nicolas Cage to appear in films. Instead, it's very possible for variables to be significantly related to each other even without having a relationship where one causes the other one. And next week we'll come back and talk a little bit about spuriousness, which is what this is called in research as well. But for now, I'll just leave you with this idea that correlation and association are not causation.